welcome to Lesson 14.2 in the Alice tutorial series. Lesson 14.2 is going to continue what we started in Lesson 14.1, specifically working with parameters in Alice. Hopefully you got something out of the last episode, but one of the things about parameters is that it's one of those skills that starts to take more practice. A lot of what we've done in Alice up to this point has been pretty easy to pick up on. It's stuff that you could learn by doing it a couple of times. Parameters, world level methods, later class level methods get to be more advanced programming techniques, so it'll probably take a little bit longer to catch on. So if some of these lessons seem to be a little bit more difficult for you than some of the earlier ones, it's not that you're getting worse at programming, it's that the concepts are getting more difficult. We'll provide a few more examples in Lesson 14.2 on how to use parameters. Maybe making a car drive and passing in a parameter how much gas it has, how many times a kangaroo jumps, how high. So these number parameters are something that we'll work with in this lesson, as well as maybe a few other object parameters. So let's go ahead and get started with Lesson 14.2, continuing our lesson on parameters in Alice. So here we are in a fresh Alice world, and in order to keep working with parameters, we'll have to set up a bit of an initial scene. So click on Add Objects, and let's go to the Animals gallery for this, and let's pull out a kangaroo. So scroll over till we find the kangaroo, and we'll get him front and center in our screen. I want to write a world level method that will allow me to tell the kangaroo how many times he's going to jump and how high I want him to jump. So to do that, I'm going to have to create a new world level method. So click on World, and then down here click on Create New Method, and I'm going to call this Kangaroo Jump. Once I click OK, I'll see World Kangaroo Jump has shown up here, and I can start programming this kangaroo to jump. Of course, you've done this probably a million times by now. Let's go ahead and select the kangaroo, go down to Methods, and we will have the kangaroo move up. For right now, we'll go half a meter, and then move down half a meter. And in my first method, we'll call World Kangaroo Jump. So in my first method, drag kangaroo jump, and we'll see we get the kangaroo jumping once. So this is the initial scene that I'm going to use, but I want to go back into the kangaroo jump method and add some parameters so that I have a bit more control over this method when I call it. Now that I've got this initial scene set up, what I want to do is control how high the kangaroo jumps when I call this method. See, right now I have it set fixed at half a meter. But I want to be able to make the kangaroo jump higher or lower by using parameters. So let's click on Create New Parameter, and we're going to be using a numeric parameter. And I'm going to call this How High. Now recall that I'm going to use underscore notation here, everything in lowercase, with the underscore to replace spaces. In Alice, it's not really a necessity. It won't impact your program at all, but other programming languages, if you follow the Python tutorial series on the same channel, you'll find other programming languages won't let you use spaces, so it's a good idea to get into this habit now. At any rate, I have a parameter named how high that's going to be a numeric parameter. And I can tell it's a numeric parameter because now that I've hit OK, I have the 1, 2, 3 icon on a parameter called how high. Instead of having my kangaroo jump at a fixed half a meter, I'm going to drag how high into that distance argument. So now my method is calling kangaroo move up how high meters. How high is going to be something I can adjust when I call this method. In fact, if I go back to my first method, I can see how high right now is set to 1. My first jump, I want my kangaroo to jump half a meter. So I'm going to select how high to 0.5. Next, I'm going to drag another kangaroo jump and pass in 1, and then a third, and pass in 2. So this kangaroo should jump a total of 3 times. The first time half a meter, the second time 1 meter, and the third time by 2 meters. Let's hit play and see what happens. There's our half meter, there's our full meter, and there's our 2 meter jump. So using parameters, I can add a numeric parameter and pass it in to this distance function right here, or this distance argument, and make it so that when I call this method, I can put a different value in each time without having to program the kangaroo jumping 3 separate times. Well, that's all well and good, but perhaps I want to control how many times the kangaroo jumps. Let me go ahead and delete these 2 calls so that I only have my 1 call here. Let's go back to Kangaroo Jump. I want the kangaroo to jump a fixed number of times, or a variable number of times, but something that I call during the function call. So let's go ahead and loop the kangaroo jumping for now 1 time. When this is called now, I should only get 1 jump because the loop runs 1 time. And that's pretty good. And if I were to come in here and change the loop to run 2 times when I hit play, the kangaroo will jump 2 times because the method call has it looped twice. Go ahead and create a new numerical parameter, and we're going to call this number of jumps. This numeric parameter will set the number of times I want the kangaroo to jump. Again, it's a numeric parameter because I can see this 1, 2, 3 icon next to it. And instead of having this loop a fixed 2 times, I'm going to change that to number of jumps times. When I call this method in my first method, I'm now going to provide an argument for how many jumps there are. So let's say 2 jumps. Hit play. And I get 2 jumps. If I drag Kangaroo Jump over now, I have to provide 2 pieces of information. First, how high, and we'll call it 2 meters, and now the number of jumps. I'm going to select 5, and now I can see the second time this function is called, the kangaroo is going to jump 2 meters high, and he's going to jump 2 meters high 5 separate times. Hitting play, I'm going to get my 2 half-meter jumps, and now I'm going to get 5 2-meter jumps. Using these numeric parameters, I can replace any calls for fixed number in my code and adjust it to something that I control at runtime. Now this is pretty important for reusing code, because a lot of times what my students do is they'll go through and they'll program every type of kangaroo jump they want. They'll program a half-meter jump and then a 2-meter jump and then a 1-meter jump and end up with just loads and loads of code. We're able to have control over how many times the kangaroo jumps and how high the kangaroo jumps simply through one method with 3 lines of code in it. So it's an important skill to practice and get better at, especially when you start programming interactive environments and not fixed animations. That right there is just a little bit about numeric parameters. I'd like to provide another example as well, and I'm going to use a world that's a little bit more complicated and one that we've built already. So if you watched the video on lesson 11.2, we created a vehicle that drove down a road, and using a billboard it kept track of how much fuel that car had remaining. I'm going to go ahead and open that world. If it's not something that you've programmed, take a look at lesson 11.2 and build a similar world real quick if you'd like to follow along. If not, you can watch this video and kind of see what we do and use what we've done in this program to help you build your challenge program for this lesson. So this is the world that I was talking about, and if you don't remember it, just hit play really quick, and we had this car run for a fixed amount of time, and it was starting with 100 fuel, and every time it ticked, it knocked fuel down. So if you set up a scene like this, and, scroll through here and see that we have code all set up, I want to create a method that allows me to control how much fuel the vehicle has and how far it travels. In order to accomplish this, I need to get all of this code out of my first method. It's possible to use it in my first method, but I really, to clean this code up, would rather have it in its own unique method. So let's go to world and create a new method called car drive. And see, I have a new method here to work with. Now, here's a trick that we haven't really talked about yet, but what I want to do is I want to get all of this code over to car drive. But if I just drag it, I can't put it in car drive. It makes copying and pasting a little bit difficult. And what a lot of the new Alice programmers will do is simply recreate this in car drive. But you do have a clipboard and you do have the ability to copy blocks of code. So take this loop and drag it to the clipboard on the upper right hand corner of the screen. Now go to car drive and drag from the clipboard into that new method. You can see that all the code is there. Now I'm going to delete it from my first method and instead make a single call to car drive. Now essentially at this point we should have the exact same program. It's still looped 101 times, we still have the car moving, the distance is still being decremented by 1, so all this stuff is still kind of working. So we have our animation running. Let's start to use parameters to give us a little more control over this animation. I'm going to create a new parameter. It's going to be a numeric parameter, and I'm going to call it fuel remaining. Hit OK, and now I have this parameter that I can use. I want this program to loop as many times as we have fuel remaining. So drag fuel remaining over to your loop 101 times. You can see now that instead of 101 times, we're looping fuel remaining times. Over in my first method, you can see I have to provide an amount of fuel for this program. If I were to run it right now with fuel remaining 1 as the default, see, it'll run 1 half-second loop, and that'll be it. If I made it, say, let's call it 20, hit 20, it'll loop 20 times. The fuel remaining is being updated correctly, it's rolling okay, but the fuel remaining right now is set to always start at 100. And that's not really good. I want it to start at whatever fuel remaining I had passed into this argument. So the way I'm going to do that is go back to car drive, and before this loop runs, I've got a parameter in the station wagon, or not a parameter, but a variable. And I have the variable distance set to 100. This fuel remaining number is coming from this distance right here. So I want to drag this distance before my loop, and I'm going to have it set its value right now to just a dummy value. It's going to be set to 20. Now, since the initial value is still 100, on this preview screen, fuel remaining is going to equal 100 and there's no way around it. But as soon as I hit play, the station wagon distance variable will be adjusted to 20, which should affect what's displaying on my screen. So when I hit play, I immediately get to 20 and it starts counting down. Now that's exactly what I'm looking for right there. So I'm going to, instead of starting it at a fixed number 20, set it to the same number that I have fuel remaining. So fuel remaining will be the number of times this program loops, as well as the initial value for my fuel remaining billboard. This way, when the program runs, it should always sync up fuel remaining on the billboard and the number of times the program loops. So hit play, and we can see we start at 20, we start counting down, and when we run out of fuel, the animation stops. I see it's stopping at 1, and I could go through and debug and figure out why that is, but for purposes of our example, I think that's a pretty good example of what we wanted to do. If I want this to start with a fuel of 30, I can just select 30, hit OK, and when I hit play, fuel remaining starts at 30, and then counts down from there. In fact, I could call this function a number of times now. If I go up to world, method, car drive, fuel remaining, and then start it at 20, what would happen is immediately after the car ran out of fuel at 30, it would then reset to 20 and go again. So if I hit play, we watch the fuel count down from 30 to 0. As soon as it hits 0, that loop will break. It will call the next line, which is to have the car drive again from a fuel remaining of 20. We see it pops back up to 20. Now, it's not necessarily the most useful program in the world, but it does provide an example of how you can use numeric parameters, both as arguments, such as something for distance. You can set numeric parameters to the number of times something loops, and we can use numeric parameters to pass in values to different variables that we're using in our program. And that's going to do it for lesson 14.2 on parameters. You know, when I started this video, I really thought that we might be able to get to all the parameter stuff that I wanted to talk about, but we're approaching, I think, about the 16-minute mark on this video right here, so it's starting to get a little bit long, and there's a couple of other important parameter examples that I want to give you. So we're going to go ahead and cut short this lesson on parameters, and you'll find the challenge program as well as a couple more examples on how you can use parameters in your programs in lesson 14.3. Now, as always, I hope this was helpful for you. If you need help with any of your programs, please let me know in the comments, or if there's anything that we can do in these videos to make things a little bit easier on you, definitely let me know, because really this series is here for you guys, and I want to make sure that it's beneficial for you. So thank you so much for watching the Alice tutorial series. Have a great day, and we'll see you back for lesson 14.3.